In this session, I get the proud moment of being able to introduce all of you to our amazing FPWR research team. These individuals are bringing it every day. They're coming into the office. Well, we don't have an office, but they're going to their home office to do what all of us want, is to find treatments. That is our one mission that we're trying to accomplish here. So I thought that we could take a minute to introduce each of them to you, and then we'll do an interview with them so that you can get a highlight of some of the amazing work that they're all working on. So we'll just start here, and you can introduce yourself. Take 1 minute, introduce yourself, and just pass the mic.
Okay, my name is Jessica Bohanowicz. I am the Associate Director of Research Programs. My background is in molecular biology and a lot of research along those lines, but I do also have a nephew who's 17 years old with Prader-Willi syndrome. And I was just realizing, Susan, I think this month or next month, I am officially 10 years with FPWR. So I will pass the mic on to Lisa.
Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Lisa Mattisvac. I am the Path for PWS Study Coordinator and one of the administrators for the Global PWS Registry, so I may have interacted with some of you in the past. In addition, I work collaboratively with the research team on other projects like the VNS project coming up, and my more important job, or equally important job, is mom to a teenage son with PWS.
Hi everyone, I'm Caroline Vrana Diaz. I joined FPWR in 2019. My background is my PhD is in epidemiology, and I'm the research project coordinator for FPWR. So I work in a lot of different projects. You'll hear me talk a little bit about the CLIC that I work very closely with later. I also run the advocate reviewer side of the grant program. So if you are interested in reviewing the grants that come in and help us sort of shape where your money goes, please reach out to me and we'll put you on that list to be advocate reviewer. So it's caroline@fpwr.org if you're interested.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Theresa Strong. I am Director of Research Programs at FPWR. I am mom to a 28-year-old now with PWS, Daniel. I had a PhD, or got a PhD, before I started having children. I was really interested in genetics, so I have a PhD in genetics. I worked in rare disease. I worked on cystic fibrosis and Huntington's disease. And then I had twin boys, one of whom has PWS, Daniel, and another who does not, and two other girls as well. And I had a career in academic medicine, so I worked in the area of gene therapy, specifically cancer gene therapy, so developing gene therapy for breast and ovarian and brain tumors. But along with some other parents, I'm a co-founder of FPWR, and for many years I stayed in academics and kind of did FPWR work on the side when we were smaller. And as the organization grew and our programs became bigger, I eventually in 2016 transitioned to where I'm now full-time Director of Research Programs at FPWR. I am a volunteer adjunct professor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I still teach a little bit of genetics to the students. I teach them a lot about PWS and some other things as well. And it's just very exciting to see the growth of our organization and everything we've been able to accomplish and all the work that we have left to do.
Hi, I'm Lauren Schwartz, and some of you might know me as Lauren Schwartz Roth. I go by both names. And I am a psychologist by training and on the faculty at the University of Washington in Seattle. I work in rehab medicine with adults with acquired physical disabilities. I did that before I had children. And then I had children. And I have 2 young adult daughters now, one of whom has Prader-Willi. And I got involved with FPWR very early on after Theresa got involved, 2004, I think, and been working in a variety of capacities, but for the last 10 years have been working as kind of overseeing all the behavior and mental health research programs through our foundation. And it has been amazing to see the growth of all the research we've been able to fund and be involved in, and the growth of our organization, and it's wonderful to be back in person too.
Hi, I'm Mark Rodilla. I joined FPWR in June as a research program manager. The project under my oversight can be considered either early translational or just pre-translational. That includes the projects funded by the donation from the Storr Family Foundation, which we'll talk about later. My background is a PhD in biomolecular structure and biophysics from Purdue. After that, I was, for a couple of years, director of the Biological Materials Facility at the Brandeis Materials Research Science and Engineering Center. And then for 4 years, immediately before now, I was principal scientist at Repair Biotechnologies, a cell and gene therapy biotech focused on dyslipidemias.
Hi, my name is Ian Hassan. I'm a newbie. I started on the 1st of September. I do have a PhD in cell biology, but I got that when I had hair, so you can work that one out. But I've spent most of my life working in major pharma, developing drugs. I started off as a research scientist, but then I went into developing drugs. I've developed a number of drugs and got them approved through the FDA and the European Health Authority as well. But the last 15 years of my life, I've been working, doing what major pharma calls due diligence, which is looking at small companies and assessing those to see if we can license in that compound or buy that company. So I've worked in that area for 15 years, so I've got a vast network of people that I know in the biotech industry. And I'm just sort of getting used to my role with FPWR, but hopefully I can bring that experience of pharmaceuticals and biotech and developing drugs and what to do to the table for the research team. And first and foremost, though, I'm also the father and parent of Alex, who is 14 with PWS.
Great. Well, thank you so much for those quick introductions. As you guys can see, we have quite a team here that we've built for all of you. So we're going to do some quick questions for everybody, and we're going to go right to the meat of the matter, get things exciting, because I know that you all have this question, because I have had this question, which is, last year, 2 companies completed phase 3 clinical trials. Now what's happening?
Which mic? We have too many microphones.
Is this one? Oh, it is working. Okay, great. So yeah, start with a hard question. So I will start just by saying that drug development is not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of up and downs, and I think as a community we are experiencing that, but we learn nothing from our children if we don't learn how to persevere through things, and I think, we need to remain focused on that. So the 2 companies that completed phase 3, which is the biggest in size clinical trial last year, were Levo Therapeutics and Soleno. And Levo went to the FDA, asked for an approval. Their drug is carbetocin. And the FDA felt like there was not enough evidence to give an approval to carbetocin at this time. Unfortunately, as is the case often with smaller companies, they weren't able to continue, just as a single entity. I think the good news in that case is they have been acquired by a larger company, Acadia, that has a lot of experience in the neuroscience space. And, we're hopeful that means that the drug development will continue. So we're just going to have to wait and see on that one. And the other one is Soleno Therapeutics, which many of you have heard of. Their drug is DCCR. They've completed a phase 3 clinical trial. The data, again, was very strong if you look prior to the onset of COVID. But with the onset of COVID, some of the significance values went down, and which is not unexpected given everything that happened during COVID and given the fact that the endpoints, what they were looking at, was based on parent impressions. So they've had a lot, and I don't want to speak for the company. There are Soleno representatives here, so I'm not speaking on behalf of the company, and you can speak to them directly, but just from a sort of family standpoint, they continue to press ahead and gain new information that would be supportive of approval of the drug. They continue to have discussions with the FDA, and we're hopeful that all of that will come to fruition in the relatively near future. So I think the take-homes from these experiences is that, you know, there are things as a patient community that we can control. There are things that we can't control. The things that we can control are, you know, helping the FDA understand the unmet need in our community. And we have done that. I think we've done a pretty good job of that. We have a clinical trial consortium. Many of you have filled out surveys. We sent you endless surveys. I know sometimes you're like, why are you sending more surveys? But it's really important for the FDA to understand what are the needs of the community. They seem obvious to us, but they want to know what the needs are. What kind of risk tolerance do we have? So, you know, will we accept a little bit of risk in a drug if it can have an effect? And we've done a good job of putting all that together for the FDA to see, and I think they've been educated quite a bit about PWS. I think we need to keep pressure on about the urgency of the situation, about how, you know, every time we're waiting for, you know, new drugs to be approved is time that could potentially be helping our kids. You know, so we don't want any lag. Of course, we want a drug that is safe and a drug that is effective, but, you know, we also have an urgency that I think regulatory agencies don't necessarily fully understand. So it's our job to keep the pressure on. The other things that we can do is continue to work with our PWS clinical trial consortium to look at things like endpoints. Now, endpoints in clinical trials are not exciting, but drugs kind of live and die based on whether you've chosen the right endpoint and whether you reach significance on that endpoint. So we work with collaboratively with industry partners as well as our academic partners, so the clinicians that all of you see, to try to make better endpoints. So I think we just need to press on and really, you know, hammer on those things that we can control. And I think we need to all look at clinical trials and consider whether we can enroll in them or whether we're comfortable enrolling with them. So our job is to bring that information to you so that you can think about it and enroll in those trials that make sense for your family. And hopefully it will all come together and we will soon have new treatments for PWS.
I really can't stress enough how fortunate we are as a community to have Theresa and her guidance in this area. We've really been able to establish a portfolio of literature that helps support the FDA's need for this unmet medical need, expressing to them why we need treatments and what would be meaningful to our families. So thank you, Theresa, for help guiding that. I mean, we're ready for an FDA approval, right? We really, really are. The Global PWS Registry has really shown itself to be incredibly valuable for generating insights into PWS. Perhaps, Jessica, you could tell us what data has recently been used from the registry to expedite research.
Sure, and I'm going to link into some of the things that Theresa's already spoken about. But for those of you who are not familiar, the Global PWS Registry launched in 2015. It is designed to be an online database with the ultimate goal of representing every person with PWS in the world. You know, right now it's only available in English, and so that's somewhat of a limiting factor, but it is web-based. It's a series of surveys that are completed by parents, caregivers like yourselves, and covers the broad spectrum of PWS, you know, every topic area, basically. The goals of the registry are to help us as a community better understand PWS, everything, you know, all ages, who's doing well, who's not doing well, to be able to generate the information that Theresa's talking about, a lot of the documents that go to the FDA, that a lot of that information comes from your stories that are in the registry. We're using the registry to improve clinical care, and we're also using the registry to advance research and to help advance and expedite clinical trials. So some examples of ways that that's being done in the past year, 2 years or so, there have been a couple of publications that have gone out into the peer-reviewed literature. These have covered topics, everything from a manuscript that we wrote on vision in PWS, sort of covering what are the most frequent vision issues in PWS, how does the prevalence of those increase in PWS versus the general population. There was a focus there on strabismus specifically and the frequency of strabismus surgery. There have been a couple publications diving deeper into mental health in PWS, as Lauren's going to talk more about the importance of mental health, but giving us a better understanding of the prevalence of anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorders, even things as severe as suicidal thoughts, and how those compare in PWS versus the general population. And then Lisa's going to talk a little bit more about a publication that came out on blood clot risks in PWS. But all of that data has come from the registry, from you. It's all come from what you have provided into the registry. And the goal there is that we're putting these into the peer-reviewed literature. They're what is called open access, meaning that you yourselves can go online and Google those and you can pull up any of those publications. It's giving you, empowering you to have information to take to your caregivers. The next thing I would say is that we're helping support clinical trials through the registry. We serve a little bit like a dating service. So if you're in the registry and a company is conducting a clinical trial, they come to us with what they're looking for, and we provide that information out to people who may match that. As Theresa mentioned, the registry is being used to advance endpoints, things like the PADQ, which I think Lauren is going to talk a little bit more. That's the anxiety and distress questionnaire. Lisa's going to talk a little bit more about the hyperphagia questionnaire. All of those were studies were done through the registry. And the last thing I do want to highlight is, we're always working on new projects through the registry. So if you are involved, you may have seen a couple of new surveys that were launched in the past year. There was a new survey on feeding tubes, the use of feeding tubes, prevalence, especially diving into trying to understand what complications are associated with different types of feeding tubes, NG versus G tubes. That was a new survey that was conducted in collaboration with the CLIC, which Caroline has mentioned. And there's also new surveys that have come out on mood and quality of life. And these are standardized surveys that are used not just in PWS, but in broader drug development and therapeutic development in general. So these are surveys where if we can understand what the baseline assessments are in PWS, then we have a point of comparison when we have therapies to understand how therapies may be improving quality of life and mood scales for your loved ones with PWS. So my take-home message basically is that everything that everybody else on the panel is going to talk about, the registry is intertwined into everything that we do, but it is, most importantly, it is yours. It's your tool. I kind of equate it, it's a quilt. Every patchwork is a story, and we always want to make sure that your story is represented. So if you're not in there, come on in. If you are, come on update. We want to make sure it's as up to date as possible.
Thank you so much, Jessica. The registry really is a great tool. Even as a parent, if you put your data in there, you can always go back and refer to it. So it's just a great storage place for you as well as for research. So let's talk about Path for PWS, Lisa. Path for PWS, it's a natural history study that's been going on for the last 4 years, and it's a subset within the global PWS registry. Can you provide us with some highlights of what we have learned from this study so far, and maybe what has been Path's impact on the research landscape?
Yeah, so PATH has really been incredibly impactful. As Jessica mentioned, the registry began in 2015, and in October of 2018, we launched the Path for PWS study as a sub-study within the registry. And what we saw was this tremendous growth in information coming in, and the number of people contributing more than doubled. So we have a lot of really good, robust data encompassing birth, well, for PATH, age 5, up until some families with loved ones in their 60s. So it's really looking at the lifespan of PWS and all of the challenges that are different from age to age and as the person with PWS ages. And in many ways, this has become a very mobilized sort of go-to group because they're asked to go in and update surveys every 6 months. So we're getting a lot of really rich data that we can look at comparisons over time and trends over time. From the Path for PWS study, the very first publication that we have put out is on the D-dimer sub-study and thrombosis risk history, and that is driven from the surveys that were completed in the registry combined with a blood test that was done as part of the Path study And so there were some very interesting facts that came out of that, one of which is that by the age of 30, approximately 8% of the participants were showing or had reported experiencing a blood clot. And so this is significantly higher than the general non-PWS population, and that's really important for us to understand. The age of blood clots in the population was also younger than the general population. So about 80% of those with PWS were reporting those blood clots had occurred before the age of 30, whereas in the non-PWS population, the age of risk for blood clots rises with it being more significant over the age of 80. So very, very different. Those reporting a history of edema or swelling also had a higher incidence of blood clots. So we need to understand that our individuals that have edema, we should be looking and asking the questions of our physicians more routinely. Is that an issue that they need to be watching for? We also looked at trends and changes in hyperphagia over time. So that was done by filling out the HQCT, or the Hyperphagia Questionnaire for Clinical Trials Survey. This showed that there was an increase in hyperphagia scores with age, no surprise there. But there was also a positive correlation with those scores and weight. So the BMI of those in the overweight or the obese category had a significantly higher HQCT score, indicating that their hyperphagia was greater. We did find that there was a wide range of scores, however, and so that led us to interview a number of the caregivers of adults that were reporting low scores so that we could understand better what might have been happening in that population. And in those instances, most caregivers expressed that they really relied heavily on structure and routine to manage those food behaviors. And in those instances, all the caregivers that I interviewed also assisted with meal preparation. So there were so many controls in place. It was really managing a lot of the behavior that sort of made the hyperphagia maybe appear as though it wasn't as significant, but in fact, there were all of these routines that they were relying on. About half of the caregivers also, used strategies like constant line of sight or some type of security around the food to ensure that their loved one didn't gain access. And worrying about food and transitions, reduction in social interactions, and sort of making your social circle smaller and your environment smaller to control for these things were some of the ways that people were managing that. But I also want to mention that one of the really important things that came out of people completing that HQCT survey on a regular basis was that those HQCT surveys had a direct impact on the drug development process with the FDA. So Soleno Therapeutics has done a study comparing the HQCT scores for those participants that were in the DCCR trial and matching them with PATH participants who are not receiving any kind of experimental treatment. And their analysis found that there was a significantly improved hyperphagia and behavior score for PWS individuals receiving DCCR. So everyone that contributed to completing those surveys as part of the PATH study, you contributed more globally to this process of understanding and being a comparison cohort. So that data was collected all at the same time, which is why it was a really good use of the information. It was done coinciding with the DCCR trial, and it provided further evidence of DCCR's efficacy. Oh, sorry. I'm done.
I think what we can see there is the registry and the Path for PWS study as part of the registry is really becoming important as we're seeking out treatments for Prader-Willi syndrome. We're now being able to provide data to help support clinical trial activities. So let's go to our next question. I'd like to hear a little bit from Lauren. Lauren mentioned earlier that she really focuses in on mental health and the social cognitive aspects of Prader-Willi syndrome. So Lauren, we know that people with PWS need a little extra help with their social skills and their behavior. So FPWR has made significant investments into several programs with the aim of developing resources to help parents guide their children to successful interpersonal relationships. Do y'all know what that means? Successful interpersonal relationships. It's a mouthful for me. But perhaps you could give us an update, please, on some of these resources that are under development for our families.
Yeah. Okay, this is on. Good, yes. Successful relationships. Making friends, mostly. Making and keeping friends. there have been two studies that have gone on over the last few years that some of you have probably heard about. One is the PRETEND study that has been done by Anastasia Dimitropoulos and her group. Someone's alarm is going off, by her group at Case Western. And they focused on a telehealth intervention for young children, preschool and school age, looking at if can we improve play skills, which is the building blocks of social skills and social cognition. And they found positive results. And then Elizabeth Dykins and Elizabeth Roof at Vanderbilt did a study called the BOSS study, and this was a group over Zoom, and this was for teens and young adults. And again, they developed a specific social skills curriculum for PWS, and they found positive improvements in terms of social skills, social cognition, and both of these studies being maintained positive results over a period of time. So, but what I want to report on today is that both of these researchers are creating training materials. So and curriculum. So we will have available very soon some training modules that include kind of how to do this intervention with training videos so that professionals and parents can have access to how to actually do these interventions with their children or find professionals to do the interventions. So this is really exciting kind of a way of bringing research back to your community, the effective results of these studies. So be on the lookout for that soon. And should I just go on and say all the things I'm supposed to say? There are a few, we're doing, as you all know, their behavior and mental health challenges are can be a big issue for Prader-Willi, so we're always doing lots of different studies in this area. So I'm going to highlight a couple other things that we've been working on. As Jessica mentioned, we did a study looking at developing a new questionnaire to assess anxiousness in PWS. Anxiousness is a treatment priority for both people with the syndrome, if you ask people with Prader-Willi, and their caregivers. But there are not really good ways of measuring anxiousness in PWS. It has some unique aspects, doesn't really map on consistently with anxiety. And we even reviewed a bunch of current anxiety measures out there and found that none of them really fit what we were looking for. So we collaborated with Levo Therapeutics, as well as our research team in the Clinical Trials Consortium, to develop this new questionnaire. And many of you may have participated and filled out the questionnaire through the registry. And this has been recently published and is available for use. So the hope is that if we have a way of measuring it, that there will be more treatments coming down the road for anxiousness that our loved ones struggle with. Another study I wanted to focus on that I'm working on right now through the Clinical Trials Consortium has to do with clinical trials and the experience of either being in a trial as a family or as a site investigator. And we want to know about, from the trials that have gone on over the last few years, what's gone well and what hasn't gone well. And we want to put together kind of a list of suggestions to pharmaceutical companies about kind of how to make the clinical trial experience more feasible, comfortable, and doable for families, as well as for the doctors and nurses who run those studies. So be on the lookout for a survey coming your way soon for those families who've been in trials. And one last thing I'm going to say is caregiver stress. As many of you know, being a caregiver, a person with Prader-Willi, as lovely as they are, is a marathon and can be stressful. So there's been some studies going on, one in particular, looking at how to impact and improve caregivers' well-being. And a study going on this year through Purdue University with a group of researchers who have a special interest working with caregivers of rare diseases, looked at evidence-based treatment, both individual, group, and couples treatments to try to find the most effective approaches for helping us. And if we're doing better, our kids are doing better too. And they've just finished this study. Results will be coming out soon. But the really good news we just heard from them is that they went on to apply for a large grant to continue their work looking and helping caregivers. And they just received this large grant from the NIH. So that's the kind of thing that we want to do, is do a pilot study so it leads to a larger study.
So Lauren, we gave that group a small grant. And
Yes.
how much did they just receive?
I think $3 million, yes.
A little bit of ROI right
Yes.
there.
Yes.
right? Return on investment. We gave them a little bit, they showed the benefit, and then they were able to go out and get a really large grant to continue that work.
And Theresa was saying we maybe gave them 70,000, which is, not nothing, but something, and they did great work with it. They got it done, they did it quickly, and I talked to a lot of caregivers who were in the study, and they said it was a really positive and helpful experience. Many said, I wish I would have done this 5 years ago. So there will be opportunities to take part in this treatment, which is all remote, all through telehealth, in the future as Dr. Kelleher's grant gets going over the next year or so.
Thank you so much, Lauren. So this year, FPWR was really fortunate to receive a very generous contribution from John Storr and Suzanne Storr. And with this contribution, we've been able to establish 3 new research programs that are aimed at expediting the development of new treatments for Prader-Willi. So perhaps, Theresa and Mark, the two of you, you could tell us a bit about these new collaborations that have come out of the programs.
Okay, I can just take this over. We are trying to just expand our influence in leading the field to more translational research. And so the first thing that we want is to get everyone in the field to agree on a definitive characterization of cultured cell models of Prader-Willi syndrome. There are a lot of publications of observations of certain features of the cultured cells, but it's very piecemeal. People do one assay here, one assay there, different kinds of cells. If we get everyone to agree on things that are robust, that you consistently see regardless of what the cell is that you're measuring, then that particular assay or set of assays will be used more by the members of the field, and when people come up with ideas for therapeutic interventions, they can use those, and then these phenotypes and these assays can be used to develop high throughput screens because they're reliable, and then we can accelerate the development of therapeutics that way. So to get that to happen, what we've done is we've gone out and assembled some of the scientists that have made some of the best, what we think are the best observations, characterizations of cultured cell models. And we are going to get that group of scientists. It's very challenging, but we're going to get a group of scientists to agree on something and say that this is the definitive characterization of cultured cell models for Prader-Willi, and then hopefully we'll proceed to work with industry to develop that into a high throughput screens, and then that can be used to accelerate development. The second project that we're working on is more specifically targeting the biological process that is affected by the absence of MAGE-L2. And so the process that MAGE-L2 facilitates is required for cells to prepare and release hormones that will then stimulate their neighboring cells as part of neurodevelopment. And so in the absence of MAGE-L2, this isn't happening properly. And there are a lot of ideas for how we can get these biological processes to happen even without MAGE-L2 there. We don't have to go and put something in that's going to do exactly what MAGE-L2 would do, but we can get this process to happen some other way. And there are places in the process that we think one could intervene to get this to work, but not enough people are working on that. So we are going to try to encourage more people to work on that and test these ideas that we have and that they've come up with. And for that case, rather than assembling kind of a big group to agree on it, we're reaching out to individual experts in each of the steps in the process, experts in the different kinds of biology, and getting them the collaborators and the resources they need to test these, because we think this has a high probability of yielding progress in the short term. And then the third project, we call it the Therapeutic Accelerator. This is simply, we have already funded some projects which are in early stages of translation, projects that have come in through our normal grant program. And we're just giving them an increased level of support and oversight. We're asking them to provide us with more frequent status updates, and we have more internal administrative support to to ensure that these projects move forward as efficiently as they can. And we're keeping our ears to the ground for more projects like that, and so we'll step in when they reach a stage that they need us.
So I'll just add to that, big picture overall, all of these programs are really about moving the development of new treatments forward in the most efficient manner. And the nice thing about the grant from the Storr family is that it gives us sort of an ability to look a little bit longer term and really, plan how to pull these projects forward over the next few years.
I saw some blank faces when Mark was talking about high throughput screens. Does everybody understand what that means? No. It's where a drug starts its life. You have some cells with certain characteristics, and then you expose them to 100,000, 200,000 different compounds, and then you see and measure, does that have an effect that you think could then be clinically relevant to the disease? So it's the beginning of a drug. And high throughput screens are used by every pharmaceutical company, every biotech company, and it's the start of finding a drug. That's why it's so important that we have an agreement of what cells we're using and then translate that into the beginning process of making drugs for PWS. Does that make sense? Yeah. Less blank faces, I think.
Thanks so much, Ian.
I guess I should say just that, as Ian said, you're testing 100,000 compounds. You need a test that you're going to get the same result 100,000 times if you do it. And I don't think we have anything like that yet, and that's what we're really pushing for. If your test only gives you the same result 90% of the time, then you can't run a test 100,000 times on 100,000 compounds and know which ones are working and which ones aren't. So we need the field to have something robust that always works.
And that's where FPWR really has a unique place. As a matchmaker, collaborator, facilitator, we're helping these really smart people who are located around the world come together in collaborative meetings so that we can push this forward faster, right? It might happen by itself, but if we can make it happen. So that's again a nice unique role that we have. We're doing a lot of work. There's so much going on. We've only barely touched a couple minutes per person here. So I want to get down to a little nitty-gritty, which is, for each of you, what are you most excited about? What gets you the most hopeful for treatments? Share.
I'm excited about the CLIC, so I want Caroline to talk about that.
So if you were in this room before, Dr. Diane Stafford was in her Standards of Care meeting. Diane's actually the head of the executive committee of the CLIC. So the CLIC is a new program that we started a couple of years ago called the Clinical Investigation Collaborative. And so what we wanted to do as FPWR is we know all of these really good clinicians around the country that might not know each other. So we wanted to be, as Jessica mentioned, we want to sort of be the matchmaker service, right? Like, we want to get together all the clinicians that you know, that you go to, that are really excited about research, and put them all in the same room. So this collaborative, we had 15 clinicians in person and 10 over Zoom on Wednesday here in Chicago, and to really just talk about where we want to go with this program. So a couple of things that came out of that meeting, we started with some new, as you know, the boring stuff. We, agreed on some bylaws, we talked about our governance structure, but we're putting together a couple of committees that I think are going to be really important. So one's an industry relations committee. So right now, we just want to make industry relations as efficient as possible. So this committee is really going to try to connect industry with CLIC clinicians to get the most promising clinical trials, the participation they need to move these trials more efficiently and faster. We also worked on a proposal development committee. So that's engaging the CLIC or outside stakeholders to work in collaboration to develop protocols with research questions they want answered. And then what we're really excited about is this data management committee. So we're trying to put together a database to ensure that the clinicians are collecting the same set of labs, the same set of clinical studies, to make sure that everybody's getting the same standards of care, right? We want to make sure that everybody's collecting the same data so that you all and all of your loved ones with PWS are all getting the same high standard of care. And so having this database is really cool because not only are the clinicians agreeing on, what labs should we collect, what tests and imaging studies should we collect, but they can put all this data together into a database. And then if a CLIC clinician has a research question, they can turn around and pull that data out. So they're getting a lot more data than they would just from the people that come to their clinic. So an example of the CLIC at work, so we had two, and Jessica touched on this a little bit, but we had two clinicians in the CLIC, Dr. Sandy Roy from Cook Children's and Dr. Jessica Dewis from Children's Colorado, and they said, we want to know about feeding tubes. What kind of feeding tubes are people having? What are the long-term complications of these feeding tubes? So they asked the CLIC. They said, who else is interested in this project? And they had a few people that were interested, so they put together a working group, very quickly put together a survey of questions they want answered, worked with Jessica to put it into the registry, and in a very short amount of time had over 300 responses. So thank you all very much for filling out that survey. And she was able to analyze the data and present at this research conference. So it's just a really amazing way to see how the CLIC can work together to really leverage the expertise we have of all these clinicians to make sure that we're getting research questions answered in order to improve the standards of care. Because it's not just about, papers and publications and stuff. Now they know about the types of complications that you see NG versus G tubes. And then they know they can now go back and then put that information into implementation in their practice. So it's a very enthusiastic, very ambitious group of clinicians. We're really excited to be working with them and facilitating their process. I even had two clinicians yesterday come up to me and say that they wanted to join the CLIC. So it's a really exciting project. If you're interested at all, we have a page on our website. It's fpwr.org/PWS-CLIC. So you can see the whole list to see if your clinicians around you or in your area are part of the group. And if you want your clinicians to be part of the group, email me at caroline@fpwr.org, because the more clinicians we can have in this collaborative group, the better.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I had the opportunity of sitting in at that meeting, and wow, these doctors were so engaged. You don't see this very often. They were having some incredibly meaningful conversations. They were talking about hyperphagia. They're talking about feeding tubes. It was so amazing. And I would say go look at that list of CLIC members. And if you can visit them, they're a great resource for you. If you're looking for an endocrinologist, check out the list. These are people who are really engaged, not just in treating patients, but also improving the lives of these individuals. And I'm curious, Caroline, if the CLIC has only been established for a year, if the CLIC is successful over the next 5 years, what do you think you might see from the CLIC?
I think the one thing that we're working on right now is establishing that database of clinic values and labs that we've been talking about. So I think a lot of research, a lot of new potentially standards of care can come out of that. Right now, one of the projects that sort of came out from the meeting on Wednesday was we have the HQCT, and so that's good and all, but that's parent reported. And so we're potentially thinking, can we come up with maybe a very simple clinician observed level of severity in hyperphagia, so that we might be able to have some sort of scale in the clinic as well to really complement the HQCT, and things about like skin picking severity scale, and everybody sort of has to agree on it, because clinician, you might think it's a 2 on a severity scale and you might think it's a 5, so really getting these consensus of what we're talking about so that everybody's sort of speaking the same language. So I think that is something that's going to come out from this group that we're really excited about.
That's great. I'm just going to plant the seed out to you all right now. Is we're going to be having open mics for Q&A. So if you have questions for the research team, I want you to be thinking about these. I want to see the room lined up with questions. Okay, I swear I'm going to give up the mic in like 2 minutes. But I want to hear more about what makes you guys excited every morning. What gives you some hope? So Theresa, you mentioned the CLIC. What other activities do you think are really hopeful?
Well, I think you couldn't have come from the research conference over the last couple of days and not come away with a lot of hope. I mean, it was great to get back together, first of all, but even more so, we had so many, we had a trainee award for travel award, so we had so many young, smart people who were so enthusiastic. I don't remember being that smart when I was young, but they were super smart, so enthusiastic, and, you know, going home saying, you know, I've got all these new experiments to do, you know, interacting with each other and, you know, collaborating to better understand PWS so that we can advance treatments. I mean, for me personally, I think that, you know, of course I have the long view, right? And so, you know, we've seen so much new activity in therapeutic development for PWS over the past several years, and that has included drug development. We have so many, you know, we have a number of clinical trials ongoing now. We have, you know, some promising results that we hope will lead to an approval soon. And then we're also thinking about, and I'm using the royal we now, we're thinking about, you know, devices that might be helpful for PWS. So you heard Dr. Holland talk about the VNS study. Maybe some of you heard that. We have a collaboration with GE, General Electric. They have a peripheral ultrasound way of stimulating the vagus nerve, and they're looking at that for weight control. And they're already in human clinical trials, and now they're seeing whether that might be applicable to PWS. We have a new understanding in the last year of how the deep cerebellar nuclei of the brain is influencing hunger and satiety in PWS, and there are researchers who are trying to build on that. So there is so much new understanding of what's going on in PWS, and then B, trying to use that understanding to develop new treatments and think of new ways of treating PWS. So.
I'll say 3 letters that I'm the most excited about, which is VNS. I think, very excited that we're close to starting the study, and, you know, the early studies have been very promising, and I look forward to seeing where we can get with this, and hopefully it'll be another treatment option that doesn't have some of the side effects of medications and things like that. And as Dr. Holland mentioned earlier today, many of the patients that he worked with were able to decrease some of the psychiatric medications they were taking because the VNS was so helpful. So some of those types of different ways of addressing behavior rather than medication, I'm excited about that for the future.
One of the things that's excited me is, you know, I've developed drugs in diseases where there's lots of patients. Developing drugs in rare diseases is difficult because it's a numbers game. And one of the exciting things that I've heard over the last few days is the registry. Because if you go to the FDA, they say to us, show us the evidence. And by gathering that evidence from all of you, it helps you to understand, how does my kid look on the scale of things? Is he the worst? Is he the best? And what should I understand? But the other thing we can do with the registry is go back and interrogate it to say, here, you know, we've got a small group of patients, but here we've got them all together. We've got this data. Here's the evidence. Now you can see that this is so important for getting this drug approved, getting this drug you know, to use with your patients. So I'm really excited that the registry and the natural history studies are coming together, getting mature, such that we can go and interrogate them and then help us design better protocols and better studies to be done. And studies which then, when the FDA say, show us the evidence, here's the evidence because this is the feedback we've got from the patients. Does that make sense? So it is so important that you actually put good data into the registry, because it really is helping to help us to design better studies.
That's a great plug, Ian. Thank you. You know, having lived this PWS life for 16 years now, when we first started and got a diagnosis, I think what was striking to me was that there really wasn't anything that I could sort of look forward to as like an opportunity for a treatment. And just in the last couple of years, I mean, wow, look at all of our sponsors out here, all the industry interest in changing the lives of our kids with PWS. And, I'm one of the ones who will jump at that opportunity to participate in a clinical trial. It excites me. It gives me hope that there's going to be something new and approved that will change my son's life. I like the opportunity to interact with other families while I'm participating in a clinical trial. It's something that I think we're going to continue to see more and more of within our community. And I think that in these 16 years, so much has changed. I don't know what I'm going to see in another 16 years, but I know it's going to be even better than this, and that excites me. To touch on Ian's point, as somebody who's working in that registry every day as one of the administrators, I love talking to the parents that are contributing to that. I've thoroughly enjoyed working in the Path for PWS study. I have learned so much from parents, both those that are younger, that are accessing different treatments, different physicians than we may have on our journey, but even more importantly, the parents of the adults that are really sharing with us these intimate details of what it's like to live with PWS and have maybe been on a different journey, struggling to get a diagnosis and because maybe genetic testing wasn't available at that time. So, the registry has more than doubled, as I mentioned before, and it's become such a robust tool. It is touching so many facets of everything that everybody up here has been talking about today, with the CLIC, with drug development, with understanding clinical or developing clinical endpoints, things that we didn't have as tools before that now we have so many opportunities that are going to grow from this. And I think the last thing that I would say that gets me excited is we're about to host our 15th One Small Step. And if you guys haven't done that, or it's felt like a scary thing to host an event, I can say firsthand, it may feel scary, but you do it, and what a thrill! It's just exciting to get together with all my friends. And every time I raise money, I look at these grants and I go, I did that. My contributors did that. My families that showed up to the events, they did that. So it just brings me a lot of satisfaction to be able to say, I am contributing in every way I possibly can to making my son's life better and the life of everybody else's kid that is living with this better, because we have to do it ourselves. If we have to be mobilized, we have to be energized. And I'm tired at the end of the day too, but I wake up knowing that I do this because it makes a difference. And in 16 years, I have seen such a difference.
Thank you so much, Lisa. So at this time, we're going to invite everyone to ask your questions. There's 2 mics here at either side of the room. If you have a question, feel free to hop on up and they'll answer.
Hi. I'm Rick Siegel. I have a 21-year-old Jillian who has Prader-Willi syndrome. So exciting to hear about the CLIC and 15, participants joining in that, a few days ago. 20 years ago, when we moved from Atlanta to Chicago and we were looking for, a clinician who was an expert on PWS, we came to the 3rd largest metropolitan area in the United States and had to drive to Madison, Wisconsin to find anyone who was an expert on Prader-Willi syndrome. So wondering if it might be a function also of the CLIC or something else within FPWR. Just wondering, where do we stand on, experts that people can go to nationwide? Not everybody has access to Dr. Miller. I know that she has lots of interns and she tries to proselytize and spread the word that this is something worth becoming an expert on for our kids, but is that something that the CLIC could also sort of work on to try and make sure that we're getting lots of people who know about PWS to be able to help our kids all over the country?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's really one of the goals of this, is to make sure, as I said, to sort of, one of the things we can do with improving those standards of care is making sure that everybody, right now the CLIC's just the US and Canada, but really making sure everybody has access to those experts. So I totally agree. So we're working on, every time we add a member to the CLIC, we're adding a new area of the country that can now be served by somebody that you know is not only an expert in PWS, but also interested in collaborating with other experts in PWS. So I encourage you to check the website, see if your clinician or clinician near you is a part of this group. But yes, I would say that's definitely one of the goals of this group, is to continue expanding the expertise and the expert network of clinicians.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'll just add to that I mean, it's not a closed group, and one of the goals of the CLIC is to make it as large and inclusive as possible. I mean, they do ask for certain requirements that the clinicians sort of commit to, sharing data, collaborating with others, attending the meetings, that kind of thing. But it's certainly not, it's welcome to all comers.
I just also want to add, sometimes the idea of, oh, there's a paper in the literature, it's not sexy, it's not exciting, right? But like, I know, for example, my family member goes to a clinic, but they also have their local endocrinologist and their local eye doctor, and they have their local physicians, and we're never going to be able to necessarily reach every single doctor that everybody sees, right? But by being able to put data from the CLIC in the literature, being able to put data from the registry into the peer-reviewed, that's like well-respected, peer-reviewed, that's sort of the standard among the medical, elite, is that then now you have something that's written, that's peer-reviewed, that's approved, it's rubber-stamped, that then you can take to, your specialist that has information from the PWS experts. So we're trying to empower you by putting that stuff out in the literature.
And Jessica, I'll add to that, because that is such a good point. I have done this, you guys. I've printed out medical literature and I've brought it to my doctors and said, look, this is what's out there. And they've read it and they've reviewed it, and that is how I've gotten medications for my child. So it's there for the doctors, it's there for you too, all right? We have another question.
Yeah, I have quite a few questions, but I'm gonna just try to condense them. First of all, thank you for the work you guys do for our community. I feel so lucky as a parent to have this collective think tank and to have, technology where we can collect, information about, creating standards of care. So it's really exciting to be in the rare disease world, I suppose, from where we sit. This was not even an option, 15 years ago. So I digress. But wanted to ask a few things. I'm going to pick on carbetocin because my son was one of the participants, and we were, so grateful to have a few good years with him. I mean, it just completely unlocked his brain. And so we still see, some of the outcomes of that. We see that he still has these cool, skills that he acquired and interests. But just curious, to the point of the possibility that might actually come back. Is there a way that as parents we can kind of advocate to, still be considered in a future trial? Can we still, have the opportunity to, maybe get compassionate use? I know that requires additional funding, but just wondering as a group. So that's my first question. My second question is about the way that study was assessed. They used a hyperphagia scale that, to be quite honest, felt a bit subjective. And maybe with the data we're collecting from the registry, we can kind of hone in on the appropriate way to measure hyperphagia, which does seem to be a little bit subjective. So just wondering if if this group, given the work that you do, is giving consideration to how we can maybe measure that a little bit better. And those are kind of my big questions. I'm sure I have more in a little bit, but yeah, just wanted to start there.
So I'll start with the second one, the hyperphagia questionnaire. So it's, for those of you who know the instrument, it's not perfect, but the FDA knows it, and they pretty well understand, this reduction is probably meaningful to patients. And so there's advantages to using the hyperphagia questionnaire. We are, through the PWS Clinical Trials Consortium, looking at some more objective measures, because as you say, it's very subjective. It's not very subjective, but it is somewhat subjective. You would like a more sort of hard objective measure. So we're looking at things like, or we're supporting projects looking at eye tracking, like how kids look at food and whether that can be used as a more objective measure of hunger. But those things will take a little while to develop. We've got a great group. Louise Gallagher is working on that right now, and the group at Vanderbilt has also done some work at that. So we are supporting, additional, more objective ways. In addition, there was a presentation today about using, sort of qualitative interviews, which the FDA is coming around to, sort of at the end of a study to really understand what the benefits were and how meaningful it was to patients. So this is something that we're always thinking about, and that is, the Clinical Trials Consortium is really focused on. And so, but it's a little bit of a slow progress because, again, the FDA is very comfortable with the HQCT. We know that it changes. It's not a perfect instrument, that we know that when a drug works, the HQCT comes down. We're also trying to put some training around the HQCT. Part of the problem is that it's got a big placebo effect, especially now that everyone's kind of familiar with it. And so we're trying to put additional training so that we can get better data. The other thing I will say is, one of the things we would love to do is be able to tell ahead of time, like, what is the best group. So, one possibility is looking at, so a lot of kids did fantastic on carbetocin, and but as with any drug, it's less effective in some people than others. So can we, ahead of time, figure out which group is going to be have the strongest response so that we can test in that group and really get more robust data. So that's kind of a thing that I would be hopeful that whatever, any company moving forward be really thinking about those things as they design a clinical trial. And we act as a resource, hopefully, for a lot of pharmaceutical companies, especially if they're coming into the PWS space for the first time and they don't, they have a lot of knowledge about drug development, but maybe not a lot of knowledge about our population. We can serve as a resource, and we do quite often a resource, talking to them about the protocol, talking about, what subsets and, how to look at that. With respect to carbetocin specifically, I think it is encouraging that Acadia has, acquired Levo Therapeutics. They clearly have an interest in, this sort of neuroscience area. And, we are ready and willing to engage with them, and I know our community is ready and willing to engage with them. We continue to provide information about, again, about the unmet medical need, about the fact that we have a research-ready community that has, a tremendous need, and we will be, working to move that forward as best we can from our standpoint.
Just want to make sure that led me to another question. And that is, part of the 21st Century Cures Act for the FDA is supposed to take into account, anecdotal evidence from parents. I didn't really feel like that happened well in the review of carbetocin, and I'm just curious if there's been any conjecture about moving that forward or maybe like revising that. I mean, this is like obviously a much broader question, but I felt like, there were a lot of benefits outside of hyperphagia from carbetocin, and I'm sure, we've seen that. And like there was it topiramate, where they were like, actually, we were looking at it for this, but what we saw was a reduction in skin picking. And I feel like that's kind of like our, what we're up against in this journey of rare is that quite often what we think is going to happen, may not happen, but we see these other benefits. And I just didn't really feel like that was taken into consideration.
Right, so the FDA have legal definitions of, and this is my perspective. I'm not a complete expert, but they do have a legal definition of, you need Ian will correct me if I'm wrong. For non-rare disease, you generally need 2 well-controlled clinical trials that give you positive significant results. In rare disease, they have more flexibility, and they have a guidance document that says that. Now, what I feel like is flexibility, or what you feel like is flexibility, may be different from what they feel is flexibility as far as the level of evidence they need to approve a drug. The challenge with the carbetocin study that I heard listening to that AdCom meeting was there was one dose that reached significance. The higher dose did not reach significance, and the first trial that was done was at the higher dose, so they were looking for it to replicate. And I think that, that's where they were reluctant to give the approval because they did not see that replication. So it came down to like a statistics argument where they wouldn't get past it. And I don't know, Ian, do you want to? And yeah, you have to define ahead of time. You can't do a post hoc. You can't say, so what the FDA would say was, okay, now you know the dose that is right. You know that the HQCT should be significant. Do another trial, and then you'll have the evidence. And that's essentially what they were saying, was that another trial needs to be done to show that. So it's hard because there was this Alzheimer's drug that was approved recently, and it was approved, it wasn't a really strong evidence, and there was a big backlash on that. And so I think, there's sort of a yin and yang about the approval process, and there's a lot of opinions on both sides, and sometimes it gets pushed one way or the other based on what other things are happening.
The FDA is set up to protect patients. That's their first and primary thing. And, going back and doing what we say is an ad hoc analysis or a meta-analysis is a bit like cooking the books. And you can't do that, because you've got to say right at the beginning, I'm going to do this, and this is what I'm going to test my hypothesis, and it's going to be this, and it's going to be the primary endpoint is this, and the secondary endpoints are that. And they can't afford to go away from that, because they have to maintain that, because if they don't, then you're going to get into snake oil being approved, and that's not what they want. So they have some standards. Now, with rare diseases, you can move those standards a little bit, and perhaps that's something we can have a look at. But they do still have to maintain standards, and it's there to protect your kids, and from the point of view of being given something that could be harmful, that's not really having any benefit.
But it is the flexibility question, and we have argued, and I think a lot of rare diseases do, we've sort of talked with other rare disease communities about, improving the flexibility in considering approvals.
My last question is, again, about that study. And that was, I felt like there was probably things going on behind the scene that led to the sale of that asset, which led to the closing of the study for all of us. And I know in the, DCCR, I think it is, that they're trying to do some randomized withdrawal just to see how patients are. And I guess I'm wondering if as parents, or, as what this group would consider, to say that in this situation where patients have been doing really, really well in this, safety aside, obviously this was nobody, had an adverse reaction in the way that we would expect to be a safety issue. For us, ripping that Band-Aid off was unexpected and, just very sudden. And so I'm wondering, if there isn't a way to build into a study like this where we could, have enough time to maybe pull back and, kind of help our kids who are getting a, treatment 3 times a day, who are, pretty married to rigid, their routine and they expect it. If there's something we can do to kind of help that process be a little bit smoother. So that I think that might be my last question for now. So.
No, I think that's great feedback, and I think that's feedback that we can share with pharmaceutical companies that are coming into the space, that look, this is a community that we've had drugs pulled, and, how can we make sure that families understand, the process, and, are there ways that we can, sort of soften the blow if a study has to end. But, some of this is, business decisions that, we can't control. Some of you may have heard, I think it's out now, that Radius, which had started a clinical trial recently, has stopping their clinical trial in PWS as of today. So, and that's because somebody bought them. So, some of it is just business issues.
I just wanted to add one more. So the clinical trial experience study that I'm going to be doing is, hopefully we'll get that kind of feedback. I already have heard some of that from some of the investigators I've interviewed, and again, when I talk to families as well, so we can kind of put that in a document and share that in a more systematic, formalized way. But I agree. I think that would be a great thing to have. And it was, it's just everything that happened with that was very difficult. I know. Yeah, just
Well, and
really
even
hard.
like behaviorally, you know, if
Sure.
there was like, hey, we know this is going to be really challenging. You know, here are some supports that we have in place. You're welcome to, you know,
Exactly.
call these individuals, or you know, we can, you know, kind of help figure out a strategy that might work for you. So, I don't know. That was my 2 cents. It's not going to deter us from doing studies in the future, but you know, as a parent, I think it would
Yeah.
be really nice to have that.
Really hard. Yeah.
I would add, Rachel, as a parent whose son was in that, I feel every bit of that. But I think I try to remind myself the takeaway is we saw that something was incredibly impactful for our children, and we were very lucky to have access to something for 3 years that we wouldn't have had if we didn't extend ourselves to participate in a clinical trial. And I'm really hopeful that the next company will carry that forward. But I hang on to that hope that I know that I have witnessed firsthand that there is something that made a big impact for my son.
Thank you, Lisa. So let's give this group a really big round of applause. These are our miracle makers, you guys. They are doing the job that none of us can do. I can't do research. That's not what I can do, but these guys can. So when we have treatments, we're going to have this team right here to thank, as well as all of you for participating in the clinical trials and participating in the registry and, you know, finally helping to raise the funds to make all of this stuff happen.